Hello and welcome to a very special episode on the channel this morning with me, Daniel. We're having a look at the data hub, but we're not just looking at the information because there's plenty of other great videos out there about that from other creators. What we're looking at today is when we should use the information that's in the data hub. It's a very overwhelming screen, particularly if you're not a data nerd like me and you think there's hundreds of things here. What shall I do? Do I have to do everything? Well, today we're going to try and address when is the right time to use it, what the implications of using it at the wrong time can be, and whether or not we actually need to be concerned about some of the weaknesses highlighted by it. So if you like the sound of that and you are looking forward to the video, please do put a thumbs up on it. If you're new along or you've missed the first season of our long-term stories, you can catch up with those in the eye above. A massive thank you for giving them your support as well. You can subscribe down below and turn that notification bell on to stay up to date with daily FM22 content. But for today, the focus is purely the data hub. I'm using my Derby live stream save from Twitch because that's the one where there's going to be the least spoilers. Now, in terms of the areas we're going to focus on today, I'm not going to look too much at the player or match performance stats because we did a big episode in FM21 regarding match analysis and it hasn't changed a huge amount. So I'll put a link to that up there as well if you want more detail on that. What we're going to focus on is the overview and the team performance stats, and we're going to try and work out when we should use the data hub. Can using it at the wrong time lead to negative outcomes? Should we always be concerned about the weaknesses? But most importantly, what impact do the changes influenced by the data hub have on other areas? So if we change 100 things because we've seen negatives here, what impact will that have on the tactics, on dynamics, on team cohesion, etc.? But we're going to start by having a look at the overview of the data hub. But the reason I'm starting with the overview is because this is the screen that I keep an eye on all year. The rest of it, I certainly don't, and we'll talk about why in a minute. But the reason we keep an eye on this is just your sort of general performance stats, and more importantly, in terms of reports and visuals you can ask for, it's your one-off games. So I'm recording this episode straight after a big defeat against Blackpool, and I want to put an inquest into what's happened. So I can go and look at my individual reports for one match and try and address any little tweaks that may be needed as a result. Or maybe I'll even discover my reason. A certain player's out injured, I've got a slower defender in, they played an overload on one side which is our weakness, whatever it might be. But the main reason we look at this screen when we're having a glance when things are going well or okay is just so we can see how our general performance is. And actually, you can see here, for all of my concerns about some of our form at Derby, we're above the average on absolutely everything this season compared to the rest of the championship. So there's positives at this club. What we need to do is drill down a bit further to see where there are any slight concerns, because if this was all great and it was replicated on the pitch and there weren't any problems, we'd be top of the championship, wouldn't we? Even with the points deduction. But here, despite having above average in everything, we're only in around a mid-table spot. So that's something we need to find the answer to and put the solution in place. If we look at the attacking and the defensive performance, you can perhaps see where some of those negatives are. And that means we can go and look into the team performance at particular areas rather than just starting working blind. So in terms of team attacking, our thing that's really negative is cross completion. Now, is that something I should be concerned about? Or is there an understandable reason for the weakness? Because one of the things I've seen in the forums, and the main reason for this episode, is I've seen so many people say, this is weak in the data hub, I've put these things in to fix it, but I'm not doing any better. And there's normally a quite obvious reason for that. So for example here, our cross completion rate is lower than anything else. But generally, our stats are above average. However, we've got our first two choice strikers out, we're relying on an 18-year-old kid. We've also got to bear in mind that we're playing one inverted winger from the start normally, and quite often a second two. Our left fullback is one of our weakest positions, and we're not asking the lads to cross it a huge amount. So why would we expect our crosses to be great? The only worry about the cross completion rate is if we're then putting in 100 crosses a game. If we're not putting in many crosses because it's not part of our game plan, but the odd one has to be chucked in when we're chasing a game or when we've got a set piece, whatever, then it's not a problem if the completion rate's lower. It's only a problem if we're crossing the ball 100 times a game, it's our game plan, and then the completion rate is below average. So we don't always need to be concerned about our weaknesses, and that one, I'm certainly not, because the game plan is to work through the middle, is to play the ball out from the back, and it's to create chances in central areas. So our number of crosses per 90 minutes should also be lower, because we know it's a weakness in our game before we start, and we're not going to try and make it a strength. In terms of defending, maybe this is where we have got a little bit to be worried about. There's one glaring omission in terms of our stats compared to the average, which is tackles per game. But I'm asking the lads to stay on their feet. I'm asking them to defend quite deep because we've got a 39 and a 34-year-old at centre-half. And I'm asking them to stand firm and not press until we get into the final third defensively. So we're not expecting the number of tackles to be really high. What is a slightly bigger concern is perhaps that when we're pressing in that final third, we're not making quite as many interceptions as the average. Because on that front, we would expect players to be blocking passing lanes when they get into late areas. Or is it that because we're letting them play for 2/3 of the pitch, we're naturally going to have less interceptions overall? That's something we can find out on the team performance. The clearances per game, that's something I would be alarmed about because we're getting in a huge number of blocks, which is great to see. We're defending deep, we're getting bodies on the line. We've got defenders who are experienced, not quick, but great positionally. We're getting them in the right position, which is fantastic. However, they're then not clearing it, which means we're possibly coming under larger spells of pressure than we need to. Of course, the flip side of that, because I've not got a physical team and I'm trying to keep possession a bit more, I'm asking the lads to try and play out from the back. So instead of clearing it, are they actually just following our instructions and trying to pass the ball out from the back? And therefore, you're not going to see big tooth clearances away. You're going to see the centre-half blocking the ball, and if he keeps possession, he'll pass it off to the right back or back to the keeper, which we've already seen a disaster from this year on camera. So that's one of the things I wanted to highlight early doors, is don't be alarmed just because you see two big weaknesses, because normally it's very explainable in your tactic. And from our point of view, certainly the tackles one is deliberate, and is actually leading to us conceding a lot less fouls per game, which outside the defence we've got quite a short team. We're not going to be great defending set pieces. You've seen that the odd corners we've faced. So it's very good that we're not then giving away free kicks in dangerous positions. So that is one of the big selling points for this. If you take nothing else out of it, don't panic because you've got a negative in certain areas, because quite often they're matching what your tactic is producing. You're not going to be perfect everywhere unless you're a big professional team in an amateur or semi-pro league. It's very unlikely that you're going to be brilliant in all areas. We're in the Championship. It's one of the most competitive leagues in the world, but our tactic, in my opinion, from what we've set up to what is showing here, I would argue is working pretty well. Yes, there are going to be a few deficits which we're going to work into in the team performance, but as an overall, I'm looking at that and seeing there's no gaping problems in what I've set up. We can look at some of our key findings as well. We're completing a large number of passes, but we're playing out from the back. We're trying to keep it shorter. We've got a very old squad at Derby and couldn't make many signings. So of course we want to keep the ball. If we're having 40% possession and chasing the ball most of the game, we're going to be flat on our back at the hour mark and we're going to concede loads of late goals. So I want to make sure in here, not that everything is perfect, I want to make sure that everything matches what my tactic desires. And here, I think it very much does. We can look at some of our individual statistics such as defensive work. You can see lots of blocks, the best in the Championship, not loads of clearances. We're trying to keep the ball when we win it back. And when you're looking at the individual key findings, you can also match it up to the weaknesses shown on this wheel, the so-called weaknesses. So our tackles per game is very low there, but let's have a look at our tackling numbers as a whole. If we bring them out as an individual, yes, we're not attempting many tackles. We've discussed the reasons for that, but actually we're 5th best when it comes to winning tackles. So maybe it's just that the timing's right. The lads are making sure they've got the best possible positioning before they do so. And they're winning the majority, so I would suggest that's a positive, rather than a negative you might panic about from seeing that wheel there. So my hope is that that can give you a sort of guide to general housekeeping in terms of the data hub. You really, in terms of a game-to-game basis, don't need to use anything other than this overview screen to have a glance at. I also hope that that shows you that you don't need to worry too much if you've got perceived weaknesses compared to the average of the league, for example. However, what we're going to look at now in detail is the team performance ones, what it means, what I've set up to start with, just so you can see what I use, but also when is the time to use the information, the weaknesses that are shown up in there, and what are the implications of doing it at the wrong time, and why should we not make too many changes at once, even if we see 5 or 6 big weaknesses. So let's go ahead to team performance, and I'll show you what I've got set up and why we use it the way we do. Okay, so this is my setup in terms of team performance. As I mentioned, I'm not going to look too much at the team report, the player ones or the matches, because I covered that in FM21 and those screens are still very similar. However, let's address the setup first. So I've gone from defensive to attacking in terms of the line dot charts. We've then got the shot map, which is at the end of the attacking stuff, And then I've got the sort of possession and passing stats at the bottom with the XG table for fun, because that's always a good one to look at. Now, before we address any of these stats here, it's very interesting if we look at our XG table at Derby, and it's the reason I wanted to show it. Our expected goals and our expected goals against are actually spot on. I don't think I've ever seen that with any team. We're obviously minus 10 points because we got a 12-point deduction. Without that, we'd actually be +2. What I want to look at here, though, is try and pick out where our negatives are, and perhaps what changes I could make, and why I wouldn't make them all at once. We've, of course, got very inaccurate crossing stats, we've seen that. But in terms of attempted, we're basically about halfway up the league. So there's not really a huge amount of concern there. Perhaps we could ask players to cut inside a bit more. But is that meaning we're going to then lose possession more often and have to defend from high up the pitch with our ageing back four? In terms of shooting and going forward, we've been brilliant this year. Our shooting stats are accurate, they're aggressive, we're trying to shoot, we're not working the ball into the box or anything like that. We're shooting from central areas, and bar 2 teams, we're basically top of the range for that, so we've got to be very pleased. Our attacking efficiency is basically showing there aren't many concerns, other than perhaps the crossing stats, which we could adjust if we wanted to and take that minor gamble. The goal output is really good. And not only that, when you look at the goal output overall, we're actually strong defensively as well. So not many causes for concern going forward. However, defensively, there's a few more things we could look at. Now, initially, you could look at our defensive stats. So defensive efficiency, we've got an impenetrable but busy defence. We'd expect that. We've not got the best team. But when we are having to defend, we're doing brilliantly. In terms of blocks, we've talked about that already. Then the composure when we win it back. The tackling stats, we're right up there for tackles won, even though we're not having to make too many. My concern, though, is maybe coming on the passing. In terms of passing overall, our pass completion rate and our passes attempted is up there in the top half. My concerns, though, come to passes attempted and possession lost, which is my favourite one in the data hub if I had to pick one. Now, it's just behind my head here, so I'm going to move it up to the middle of the screen. And we're going to compare it with these stats you can just see here below it, which is the passes attempted. And we're going to compare those percentages. So we're playing out from the back. We expect there to be a little bit more risk associated with that. But is there a big problem? That's what we want to find out. So in terms of passes attempted, if you look to the bottom bit here next to my head, we've only attempted 11% of passes in this corner of the pitch by our own area, basically. However, we've conceded 17% of our possession there. So that would suggest, although we're getting out from the back quite often, there are a few times where it's breaking down very defensively. And in that area, if we're conceding it in line with the 18-yard box or closer to our own goal, we're probably going to concede good chances. So that's something we might want to address with a minor tactical tweak. The middle of the pitch, yes, we're losing the ball a lot there, but we're attempting more passes than we're losing. So generally, the rule of thumb would be, if your passes attempted is higher than your possession lost, then that's great news. However, we've got to bear in mind where we're playing a bit more of a passing game, we're perhaps going to be playing low risk passes in the middle, which is partly explaining that stat. When you're playing out from the back, generally, you're playing a slightly higher risk game, which is why that's above, but 6% is a long, long way. We're also losing possession a lot more in the final third, and particularly the final sixth, than we are attempting passes. So 6% attempted, 15% lost. That's always going to happen. Maybe not that high if you've got a brilliant attacking force with great through balls, with strikers that hold the ball up well, and with good crosses into the box. But now we can start to put together a few of our stats, can't we? Crosses are inaccurate, and we're losing the ball a lot in the final third, which will include where the byline is. We've probably got our answer. So you can put stats together there. So what I'm looking at here is, do we need to play a little bit less risky in our own penalty area? I think the answer, based on the fact we've lost 4 games in 5, is yes. So let's go to our tactic and make adjustments based on the information we've used in the data hub. But this is where we've got to bear in mind, what are the implications of making too many changes or doing too much at the wrong time? Because it's very easy to get tempted into making tweaks because the data hub suggests it. If you've got that perfectionist personality trait, you'll always be searching for a better team. However, if you're winning every game and you've got momentum, any changes you're going to make are going to affect the team cohesion here in terms of dynamic, are going to affect the tactical familiarity here, which already isn't that great for us at the moment with a lot of new players. So you have to bear in mind when you want to use it. Yes, you might see a negative in the game, but at the moment, if you're still getting results, if say you're a part-time team, you can only train 2 times a week, that tactical familiarity and that team cohesion will take ages to go up again. So be very careful when you choose to implement it, because the last thing you want is to have no great tactical coaches, have one day of training a week, and then go in with 5 changes and lose an unbeaten run. So I would suggest, if you're flying on the pitch, note your changes you'd like to make, but pick the right moment. Of course, equally, if you're losing every game, which is the thing I've seen in the forum a lot, I was losing loads of games, the data hub suggested I changed these 5 things, I did it, and I'm still losing all the games. Well, firstly, you're judging the changes you've made while your morale's low, which means you're not going to get a true reflection of it. You're also knocking back that cohesion and familiarity at a time you need it desperately, so of course that's going to have a negative impact. And the thing that drives me nuts the most is people say, well, let's look at the things we had negatives on. We shouldn't play out from the back anymore because we're losing possession too often. We shouldn't distribute or take short kicks because that's where we were getting caught out. So we're going to take that off as well. We're not going to distribute to the defenders because that's been highlighted as our weakness. This is an example. If we were to do everything that was suggested, our defensive stuff's working quite well, but we weren't winning many tackles because we weren't making many. I've panicked because I've seen that on the front screen. So we're going to stay on our feet, which immediately has dropped our tactical familiarity and put up our intensity, which for an old squad is not what we want. What else did we have? We were losing the ball in the final third defensively a lot, so we're going to change Phil Jagielka. No ball playing defender, he can be just a normal centre half. Do we want to protect them a bit more? We could put Bielik to a defensive duty. We're now fixing every little issue that at any point has cropped up in the data hub. We can even go into all of these individuals and say, no, you've got to cross less often because this is where it's going wrong. You've got to do this too. We're going to make all these individual changes and we're just going to hope it works out. We've got a right winger who's crossing more often. We might say we want you to get to the byline. The left winger, we're going to say cross less often. And all we've done here is knocked out our tactical familiarity a bit, put the intensity right up, which doesn't suit the side we've got at all. And now that team cohesion when we start moving is going to drop and drop and drop. And that is the last thing we want. We're fortunate here that we're at a championship club. We've got full-time coaches, we've got good tactical coaches, and we can just go and adjust our training plan. So if you are going to make those wholesale changes, you've got to then match it up. You've got to make sure you've got the staff that can do it, which thankfully we've now got a full coaching complement. And you also need to go to your training and say, well, actually, we need, where we're doing stuff that suits our current tactics, such as playing out from the back, we're now going to have to change that. We're going to have to get general tactics improving because we don't know if these lads are capable of doing this. So if you're going to make wholesale changes, you've got to adapt to that too. But then, if you take off all of the possession stuff, maybe some of the set pieces, because you're that inclined to get your tactic trained and up to date again, your team cohesion might be great, your tactical familiarity might be good, but some of your other weaknesses might then be exposed, or some things that you were actually doing really well before. So you've got to add up, is it right to make all of those changes at once? What I would do is look to make incremental changes. So the playing out from defence, not a massive concern because we're still not conceding that many goals, so I would leave that on. The stay on your feet, I've already explained why that tackling stat isn't a concern at all for me, so I would certainly leave that on as well. When we're playing out from the back, I don't mind playing short and taking the risk of losing it occasionally, so we're going to distribute to our defenders. Phil Jagielka was doing a lovely job as a ball-playing defender. It's just that he's 39 and he's starting to decline. We're going to have the odd bad day. The only thing I'll probably leave on for now is that we're going to cross a little bit less often, because maybe we can just take that extra decision to cut back or work inside to the central midfielders. And that might lead to a few things being solved tactically. What we've actually found now, though, is that our tactical familiarity hasn't really been reduced a huge amount. Our intensity hasn't gone up a lot more. We're back down to moderate there. So we're not going to have that situation where we have to scramble in training and loads of players will have to make the changes. Now, we might just adjust 1 or 2 training sessions to match up with the fact we don't want to cross the ball. But if you're going to make those 5 changes, in the long term, I do want to stop playing out of defence. I do want to make sure that we can press a bit higher. But the changes have to be incremental. You don't know if one change has worked if you've made 5 at once and then you just say it's failed, I'm not getting any results. We can make that one change, assess it after 4 or 5 games and see if it makes a difference. If it does, we can continue with it and then move on to the next thing. So I might then take off play out of defence and just try and adjust to go a little more direct initially and get the ball into midfield more quickly where we can have possession in a dangerous position. If it doesn't work, we can then take it off and start from scratch again. And you can actually judge whether each change you make is working overall, because then most of the data hub stats, which are over the last 5 matches, you can go and have a look at and see, has my change made a direct impact? And more importantly, has it harmed any other area where I initially had a strength? But I hope you did enjoy this look at the data hub and when I feel is best to use it, what the implications of doing it wrong were, and of course why it's not always a weakness to have a weakness. If you did enjoy it, please do put a thumbs up on the video. If you'd like to see any more things like that, then do let me know down in the comments. I'm always open to consider it. Subscribe down below and turn that notification bell on for daily episodes from 2 long-term stories. Throughout next week, we continue our double uploads for the beta, 11:30 for our one club story with Hemel Hempstead, and 3:30 for the head coach. And then from the week after, it's daily content at 3:30 every day on the channel, with live streams on Twitch, which you can see in the eye above. A massive thank you for watching though, and giving something different a try. It is greatly appreciated. And I'll see you next time, hopefully at 3:30 today, for a big episode from the head coach. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.